Hello again and welcome back to our course on OneNote 2016. In this section we're going to start to look at managing your notes, managing your notebooks, managing the sections and pages in the notebook. So we're going to start by looking at creating a notebook, then at how to open and close notebooks, how to add sections, then we'll look at adding pages, and finally we'll look at renaming. So let's start by creating a new notebook. The one I'm going to create on this occasion is one I'm going to use quite a bit during the course, and it's a wildlife notebook. My family and I tend to keep information about wildlife in and around our house. We live in a very rural location in North Yorkshire in the UK, so we're surrounded by farms and countryside, and we like to keep track of both the flora and fauna around our house, the visitors and obviously the resident ones as well. Now when you want to create a new notebook, it's a little bit different from using something like Word or Excel, where you may create a blank document and then when you've done some work on it do a save and give it a name. In OneNote you start by naming your notebook and indeed locating it. There is a default location for your notebooks. Let's just take a look at that now. If you go into OneNote options and look at the save and backup page, you'll see default notebook location, and you can modify that using the modify button here. I'm going to leave the default as it is, but I'm going to create my first notebook somewhere else. So first of all, to create a new notebook, as you've already seen, there is a new page in Backstage View. From there I can create a new notebook, and first of all I can choose the location. I could store it in OneDrive, which is something I'm going to look at later on. I could store it on SharePoint. I have access to my own SharePoint sites. And many people nowadays have more than one OneDrive location, and I can here specify an alternative OneDrive location, a web location for a notebook, and so on. But on this occasion what I'm going to do is to just say this PC. Now having said that, if all I do is put a notebook name here and click on create notebook, then it will be in my default location. I want to create in a different folder, so I can either click on create in a different folder here, or I can use browse. I'm going to click on create in a different folder and browse to the folder. Now the folder I'm going to use is the OneNote 2016 course files folder. And when I'm working on this particular notebook, I am going to periodically change the name of it so that you can see the progression of the notebook. If you're going to work along with me on this, then I suggest you just use the same name for this notebook throughout. Now let me give the notebook a name. I'm going to call it Wildlife, and I'm going to click on create. And I now have my wildlife notebook. By default, a new notebook gets a single section with a default name of new section 1, and it gets one untitled page to get you started within that one section. And one of the first things that I often do when I've created a new notebook is to make sure I'm happy with its color. If I right click on the notebook name in the notebook panel on the left there, click on properties as we saw before, I could change the display name now if I wanted to. I'm actually going to leave it at wildlife just for the moment. Amongst the other options I have are changing the color, which I'm going to do first. I think this one's going to have to be a nice green notebook. There we are, that's better. And I also have the option here of changing location. Click on OK. And now as you can see, the little book icon against wildlife is a green book. Over a period of time, the number of notebooks that you use may increase considerably, and you may not need all of the notebooks available to you all of the time. There may be occasions when you don't actually have access to a notebook on a shared drive, for example, and you only really want to open that particular notebook when the shared drive is available to you. You can close a notebook quite easily. If I decided I was no longer going to use my notebook, the one I started with, I can either select it, go to Backstage View, and one of the options, if I go to My Notebook and click on that down button there, is Close. But also, let me just go back to My Notebook here in the list. If I right click on it, one of the options is Close this notebook. That notebook is now closed. It's not deleted, it's only closed. If I want to open it again, click on File. Note now that in the notebook information on the info page, that notebook no longer appears. But if I click on Open, you'll see a list of recently opened notebooks. So there, at the top of the list is my notebook, the one that I just closed. And it would be easy to open it again just by clicking to open it again. Now, apart from the recently opened notebook list, there is also a list of other locations. So you see recent is selected there. But if I wanted to go to my OneDrive and open a notebook from there, or even go to a specific location on my device and open a notebook from there, I could. Let me just do that. Do you remember I pointed out to you about the default location? It's in my Documents folder. So if I go to this PC, under Documents there is a subfolder OneNote Notebooks, and by default this is selected when I click on this PC. It's showing me my default OneNote Notebook location. And in there is one folder, My Notebook. If I click on that to open it, select the file there with the notebook icon, and that notebook is now open again. Now clearly, if the notebook you wanted to open is in your recently opened notebooks list, you wouldn't go through that browsing exercise. But bear in mind that, for example, somebody may give you a notebook to use, or you may need to access one on a shared device, for example. So you do need to know how to browse to and open an existing notebook. And just one other tiny little point here. The most recently opened notebook is at the bottom of the list on the left. You can change the order of the notebooks on the left. If I click on My Notebook, I can drag it up. Note the horizontal line showing its position. It now becomes the first notebook in the list. It doesn't make any difference to the content of the notebooks, but some people like to keep them in a certain order. What I'm going to do now is to add a section to my new wildlife notebook. In fact, the very first thing I'm going to do is to close my notebook. I'm not going to be using that again for a while. And in the wildlife notebook, note the default section there, new section 1. If I want to add another section, and I'm going to add a section on flora, all I need to do is to click on this plus button here. Note the screen tip, create a new section. And by default, what happens is I get a new section tab, and it has a default name in it of new section 2. If I hit the enter key now, that will be the name of the new section. But I want to call it Flora, so I just need to type Flora, hit enter, and that's the second section in this notebook. If I want to change the color of the tab, if I right click on Flora, look at the contextual menu. There's a couple of important things on there. One of them is that from here you can create a new section. So there is an option to do the equivalent of what the plus does. But I can also choose my section color. For this one, for the flora, I'm going to go for, I think I'll use a green color for that. And that's my flora section colored. Another important point here is that, as with notebook names on the left, if I wanted to change the order, the sequence of the sections, all I need to do is to click and hold the name of a section, and then I can drag it. For instance, if I wanted flora first, I could just drag it and drop it like that. Next, we're going to look at adding pages to a section. And what we're going to do here is add a couple of pages to the new flora section. By default, when the section's created, I get one untitled page. The page title is picked up from the header on the page. So if, for example, here I decided that in this flora section I'm going to have one page for each of the types of flower that I have in my garden, I might start, say here, type in the name of one of the flowers that I have quite a lot of, pink purslane. And as soon as I've typed the header name in, that appears in the pages pane on the right, and that's how I identify individual pages. Note that when I added a page, a timestamp on the addition was added. Here you can see Thursday, August 3rd, 2017. That date is actually changeable. If you want to change that for some reason, if you click on it, you come up with a little date picker here, and you can edit the date that that addition occurred. Similarly, you can edit the time, and there's a little clock control there to enable you to change the page time. To add another page, all I need to do is to use the Add Page button over there, or if I right click on the pink purslane page there, one of the options is New Page. That gives me a new untitled page. The next flower I'm going to include, and of course I may want to put them in what is, loosely speaking, some kind of alphabetical order as well. So that's adding pages. Finally, in this section I want to look at renaming, and if you want to rename a page, it's straightforward enough. Let me add another page here. That's another one of the flowers that I get in my garden, but I've in fact spelt that wrongly because it should all be one word, goldenrod. So if I select the page in the pages pane on the right, right click, one of the options is rename. Note when I click on rename, it takes me to the header on the page. So I actually do the change to the name by editing the page header. And that's what it should be. And once again, I can drag that page into alphabetical position if I'd like to. To rename a section, all I need to do, if I right click on the section tab, click on rename, I'm going to call that one Fauna, hit the enter key, and you can actually rename a notebook. So I could change that name from wildlife, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if I were to rename this notebook, this would only change the way the name is displayed in OneNote. It wouldn't change the name of the underlying files. And I'm going to come back to this point a little bit later on, because I'll need to explain this in relation to the exercises, but I'll come back to that in a little while. For the moment, if you just wanted to change the name, click on Properties, and note it's the display name that's changed here. So I'm going to call this Wildlife 01, the first version of the Wildlife Notebook. And then I'll explain more about the files, the underlying files, later on. It's time now to set you exercise 1, and generally speaking with these exercises I will be providing a sample solution. On this occasion I'm going to explain the exercise by showing you the sample solution. Now I should explain that the topics I've chosen for the sample notebooks here are ones that I'm interested in. If you have no interest in these topics at all, then by all means create your own notebook with your own subject matter, but I'd like you to make sure that in each exercise you do the equivalent of what I've done here. So for instance, in exercise 1 you're going to create a new notebook. You're going to change the display name of the notebook. You're going to have a couple of sections, and one of the sections will have at least 2 or 3 pages, and I just want you at this stage to include some images on those pages. So let me show you what I've done here. First of all, I've created a notebook with the name OneNote 2016 Exercise 01. And that is the name of the folder with that notebook in it, which is in the exercise files folder. So if you want to actually open that notebook, that should work absolutely fine. I'm actually going to rename it, because although that's the name I gave the notebook when I created it, I can change its display name as I explained before. And I'm just going to say the display name is Exercise 1. Now that will not change the name of the folder containing this notebook, which is in the exercise files folder. So when you're looking to open my sample solution, you're looking for a folder with the full name in the exercise files folder. Let me just show you what I mean by that. If I now do File, Open and Browse, looking at the exercise files folder, that is the one, and that's the one that I would click on and click Open in order to open this notebook, and that's exactly what you would do to open the notebook. And bear in mind that when you open that notebook, the display name for you will be the full name of the notebook, not the display name that I'm using. So let's just see what I've done in this particular notebook. I've got two sections, Fauna and Flora, and on the Fauna section I've got a single page for blackcap, which is the type of bird, and there's a picture of a blackcap eating some apples, pinned up apples on one of the trees in my garden. That picture is available to you in the exercise files folder if you'd like to use that. I've then got a section called Flora. I've got 3 pages, one for goldenrod, one for pink campion, one for pink purslane. For pink campion and pink purslane, I've included the pictures in the exercise files folder. I haven't included a picture of goldenrod. I've got quite a bit in my garden, but if you'd like to follow what I've done here, find a picture of goldenrod on the web and get that picture from the web and include it in the way that I showed you earlier on in the course. You only need pictures, don't worry about text at the moment. And as I said just now, if you'd like to choose a totally different subject, as long as you basically perform the types of tasks that I've set in this exercise, that'll be absolutely fine. That's it. That's exercise 1. In this section, we're going to look some more at managing your notes. We're going to look at copying and moving, at deleting and restoring, at the use of subpages, and at grouping sections. Let's start by looking at copying and moving pages and sections. I have the goldenrod page in the exercise 1 notebook in the Flora section, and I want to copy it now to Wildlife 1, one of the course file notebooks. Now in Wildlife 1, in the Flora section, there is no goldenrod page at the moment, so that should be absolutely fine. All I need to do, I'm going to do this with my fingers instead of keyboard and mouse, but I'm going to tap and hold on the goldenrod page. That brings up the contextual menu, and then I have the option Move or Copy. Tap on Move or Copy. Choose where I'm going to put it. Well, I want to put it in the Wildlife notebook, so I'm going to expand the Wildlife notebook. I'm going to choose the Flora section, and I'm going to click on Copy. And if I now tap on the Wildlife notebook, make sure I've got the Flora section selected, lo and behold, there is the goldenrod page. Now let me just go back to exercise 1 again. Choose the same page, go through exactly the same procedure again, you with my fingers, do Move or Copy. Again, I'm going to choose the same destination section. One thing to be aware of here is that if I do the copy, I don't get some sort of error that says there's already a page with this name, because strictly speaking, in OneNote, you can have any number of pages with the same header. So let's do the copy again. Don't get any sort of error message. Go into Wildlife, and of course I've got that same page twice. That's an important point to be aware of. Let me go back to the exercise notebook again. I'm going to once again choose the same page, go through the same procedure later again. This time when I do the copy, I'm going to put it in the wrong section. I'm going to put it in the Wildlife Fauna section. So copy. Now let me go into the Wildlife notebook, look at the Fauna section. I now have a goldenrod page that I don't want there. So what I could do is to move this page into the section I want it in. And of course the move means that the original here won't stay here. So if I tap on goldenrod to select it, tap and hold with my finger, move or copy, choose the section I actually want to move it into, which is Flora, and this time instead of tapping copy I tap move. That takes it out of the fauna section, and of course if I look in the Flora section I've now got 3 copies of that page. So that's how to do a move. And you may be very pleased to know that when it comes to copying and moving sections, it pretty much works in the same way, although there are a couple of special cases with sections that we'll be looking at later on. So I'll leave you to experiment with moving and copying sections. Something else that you need to be able to do is to delete sections, pages and even notebooks. And you will soon discover that the recycle bin that's provided with OneNote is going to be your friend on many occasions. Now, in order to explain the workings of the OneNote recycle bin, let me stick with the wildlife notebook here, and let's suppose I'm going to delete the fauna section. So I'm going to right click on the fauna tab, click on delete. When you try to delete something in OneNote, you are asked to confirm. So if I click on yes to confirm the deletion, that section has gone. But now with the wildlife notebook still selected, I'm going to go to the history tab. And on the history tab, in the history group, there is a notebook recycle bin button. Now I'm going to click the lower half of that button because that will show me the options that are available. I can look at the recycle bin. I'm going to do that, or I can empty the recycle bin, and you can also disable history for the notebook. On this occasion I'm going to go to the notebook recycle bin, take a look at what's in it. Now you'll see in it that I've got that fauna section that I deleted. Let me just select that here. And that basically contains whatever was in that section at the time that it was deleted. Note there, right click a page or section to restore it. Items are permanently deleted after 60 days. So they're kept there for a couple of months. After that, they're permanently lost. I think it's a lot easier to use the recycle bin if you understand basically how it works. And the way that it works is basically that when you do a delete, OneNote 2016 moves a section or a page into this special part of the notebook, the recycle bin. Therefore, when you are going to restore, you're going to move it back again. And if we take the fauna section in this case, if I right click on the fauna section, one of the options is move or copy. Now, if in fact what I want to do is to restore it, what I'm really going to do is to move it into the wildlife notebook. So it's now back in the wildlife notebook. Note the wildlife notebook is still selected, and if I go into the notebook recycle bin again, you will notice that that section has gone. In the case of pages, it's pretty much the same, except that now I have to make sure that I put a page back in the section where I need it. So if I right click on this first goldenrod, I'm going to say move or copy. I'm going to make sure I've got the wildlife notebook selected. It's going to be the flora section, and again it's going to be a move. Same with this one, and again it's going to be a move. So now my notebook recycle bin is empty, and if I go back into the notebook itself, note this little arrow here, navigate to parent section group. That takes me back up to the wildlife notebook. I can see both of my sections, and within the flora section I can now see many goldenrod pages. The other thing that you may well want to do is to delete a notebook, but you don't actually delete notebooks from within OneNote. It's really a two-step process. The first thing is to close the notebook so that it's not in use by OneNote. And then what you do is to use File Explorer or Windows Explorer, depending on the version of Windows that you're using, to delete the folder from your OneNote storage area. Now, in order to just quickly demonstrate this, I was using the default My Notebook for the first few sections of this course. I've closed it now and I don't intend to use it again. Having closed it, and therefore it's not being in use by OneNote at all, if I wanted to actually delete that notebook altogether, what I would need to do first is to find it on my device. Now, that particular notebook was in my default location. So on this PC in Windows 10, if I go to the Documents folder and expand that, one of the subfolders is the OneNote Notebook Default. It's this one. And if I select that, you'll find a folder, My Notebook, and that's the one that contains everything that is in the My Notebook notebook. So if I wanted to delete this altogether, what I would do here is to right-click and delete. Note that if I delete that notebook, it will go to the Windows Recycle bin, provided I'm using the Windows Recycle bin, and I could recover it from there, and then clearly I could open the notebook again from OneNote 2016 if I wanted to start using it again. But note, of course, that that's using the Windows Recycle bin, not the OneNote Recycle bin. One thing that I haven't introduced you to yet is the use of subpages, and people use subpages for many reasons. I'm just going to illustrate one of them to you here. If I'm working on the flora details, I've got 3 flowers from my garden here now. Let's suppose that in the process of building up this notebook, I tend to have rough notes, areas where I draft out information, and I prefer not to include that information in the main page on a particular plant until I'm sure that I've got it right and that I've sorted out the formatting and so on. So I quite often have some sort of rough draft pages. And let's suppose I've been putting together some information about goldenrod. What I'm going to do is to add a page. I'm just going to call it draft info. And I'm going to make it into a subpage. So I'm going to right click on that page and say make subpage. And that makes it a page which is subordinate to the page about goldenrod. And on this page, I might start to put in some of the information that I'm putting together, which is of a more sort of exact botanical nature. And all the time that I'm working on this information, I'm going to indicate that it is work in progress, if you like, by keeping it as a subpage. If at any time I want to promote it back to being a real page again, bearing in mind that the most likely thing though is that I'll copy and paste information from this rough page into the main goldenrod page, but if I wanted to promote it, all I would need to do is to select Promote Subpage, and that moves that page to the top level. So that's subpages. I'm looking now at the wildlife notebook, and given the range of flora and fauna that I find in and around my garden, just dividing everything into flora and fauna is really probably quite a broad approach to categorization. And what I may decide to do, for example, is to split the fauna categorization into, let's say, birds, mammals and insects. Now, in doing that, I could have 3 sections in this notebook, but I'd also want to be able to establish them as being related to each other, as being all part of the fauna in my notebook. The way that I can do this is to group sections together. So what I'm going to do now is to add a couple of sections. So I've renamed the fauna section and added a couple of other sections. What I'm now going to do is to right click on the birds section and choose the option New Section Group. Now that new section group is the one that I am going to use to contain all of the fauna related sections. Now there's my new section group. First thing I'm going to do is to rename it, and then I'm going to select the birds section, click move or copy, and I'm going to move it into the fauna group. Note now that I'm in the fauna group, and what I need to do to go back up to the top is to use that little arrow, navigate to parent section group, and now I'm going to do the same with insects and mammals. So when I'm looking at the fauna group, I can see 3 sections in that group: birds, insect, mammals. But if I go up to the top level, of course fauna is one of my groups. And of course I could do the same with flora. I might choose, for example, to split flora into flowers, shrubs, trees, grasses, etc. So in that way I can come up with a much finer classification of the sections and ultimately pages in my notebooks. So they're section groups. Note that if I wanted to remove a section from a group, all I would do, if I go down into fauna for example, and if I wanted to remove the mammals section from the group, I would do move or copy, but move it up to the top level, up to wildlife, to make it an independent section again. That's section groups. And that's also the end of this section. I'll see you in the next one.
Hey everyone, Ava here. Thanks for watching. If you're not a Simon Says It subscriber, click down here so you don't miss any videos. Click over here to check our complete training course at simonsaysit.com. And click down there to see the complete set of videos in this playlist. We'll see you next week with additional videos.